I, read up and watched, the Evergreen issue with you, and then with Benjamin post a lot about it before I did the podcast with him, and I was just dumbfounded at how that even happened at all. Like, but the thing is I was like, but Brittany, you would have been one of those people 5 years, 6 years ago, actually.
Mm.
Which is why I always give a I'm not saying for you to do this because it happened to you, so,
No,
but
no. Keep
yeah,
going.
I try to give, I not try, I give like this, not grace because who am I, but like keep the empathy tie with people that I once was aligned with, because I know what you are feeling, and you actually are usually questioning yourself because you're human. And there'd be times where I would do things to where it wouldn't align with my moral compass inside, but outwardly I'm putting my fist up, but inwardly I'm like, there's something off. And I feel like I'm not saying all of them, but there's people over there that know something's off about this. And the more people have the conversations about why it's off, the more people are going to start listening and being like, you know what, they're right, and I have to stop this. But I would say one thing I did on my channel, which actually kind of went viral, was I knew that, okay, so Jordan Peterson, for instance, I learned about Jordan Peterson after the controversy. I had no clue who this man was. Didn't know he was a controversial figure at all. I just came upon a panel he was on, and he specifically just stood out because I was like, wow, he's really challenging me, not necessarily on race issues, just by critically thinking. Like, that is like really insightful how he is thinking about these things and reframing things I never would have saw that way, and it makes perfect sense now. So I kept listening to him and listening, and then I stumbled across a controversy that says he's a transphobic white supremacist. I'm like, wait, let me see if I put that in Google right, because I don't think that's not the same man. And I'm like, what? So then I was watching those videos of people, calling him that and chanting him and shutting lectures of his down, protesting. And I watched the C-16 bill all the way through, and I was just like, but I would have been those people too. Before I would have went with the mob, and the fact that I these people are so off, and the fact that I was so off on things too, I that still dumbfounds me. But long story short, I'm a fan of him. I like him. Not to say I love everything. Like, of course, I don't agree with everything he says, but as a thinker, I think like he is very important. And I did a video about 5 things I learned about Jordan Peterson on my channel, and all it said was, "Dear Jordan Peterson, from a former Black Lives Matter pro," and I knew, okay, yes, clickbait, sue me, people. People are trying to live in this world, but I am. And I knew people were like gonna click on it because they're like, this Black Lives Matter person's gonna try to grill Jordan, and I'm gonna. But all they saw was me just, coming in with a funny intro and being like, so I heard about this guy Jordan. Didn't even bring up the controversy. Didn't, just as a man that I just found, as if I didn't know anything about the controversy at all, and just said I learned this thing and this thing and this thing, and now it has almost 400,000 views, and almost 50% of the comments are, I was coming in here thinking I was going to have to defend him, and then I left like sharing this with someone, and then this gives me hope, and this, and they're like, we might not align politically, but the fact that you see who he is, it's just stuff like that I'll do. And I know that I don't need to say much. The fact that a Black woman is talking about Jordan Peterson is enough. I don't have to do his revenge tour. Like, just me giving that video was me negating the fact that I don't think he is someone that hates women and that is a white supremacist. And of
Yeah.
course there's people that are like, I'm like, go somewhere. But stuff like that, like, yeah, and then yes, it's not easy to do. Like everyone's like, "Oh, you're so brave." I'm like, I don't know if it's bravery, but it's necessary. I think things like that's necessary, and so I do things like that on my channel, and then I have another video about how Ta-Nehisi Coates was my professor, and I love him. People just don't know how to. Like, wait, you like Jordan and how do you like them both? I'm like, well, you can.
Yeah.
And maybe you should understand why I do. I wouldn't like a white supremacist, right? So, yeah.
So that's marvelous. There's so many things I want to say in response. I'll try to remember them. But um, one thing is, it's pretty clear in your story that if you had encountered Jordan Peterson, if you had encountered his reputation first, and then you might not have even seen his videos, right? If you had, heard that he was this vehement white supremacist, you might not have given him enough of a chance to discover that actually you got a lot from his perspective. Is that fair?
Um, even with where I am now, if I just came across it, I wouldn't go out on a campaign against them, but I would just click to another video.
Right.
Definitely, I wouldn't. Yeah, I would have
So
done that.
that's amazing, and very lucky that you encountered stuff in the order that you did. I'm quite fond of Jordan. Um, but the other thing is what I love most about your perspective is that it's clear in many of the stories that you've told that you start from the evidence or from your experience of the world and you reason from it. You're not working backwards from the conclusion that this, that, or the other is true. And so you keep
Mm-hmm.
arriving at places that don't align with these stories that we're being told. And you have the courage to stick with what you've figured out rather than be bullied into accepting what the crowd is saying. So
Mm-hmm.
that's marvelous. And, I also hear in your story, you said, I mean, amazing for you to say to me that had you been at Evergreen, you probably would have been on the other side. Um, but I'm glad that you did say it, and you probably have heard from Benjamin when you spoke to him that he and I both have maintained from the beginning that most of the people who were on the so-called other side were good people who were confused about what was going on. Right? There were some bad people, but it was not a large number. It was a tiny number, and they misled a lot of other people. And so, I take a certain amount of flack for saying that. People, they actually don't like it when I leave that open and I say, good people acting on bad information, that feels like I'm giving more credit than is due. But I know it's not the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know that basically there aren't, it'd be hard to accumulate that many bad people, right?
Mm-hmm.
These had to be
Yeah.
people who were, I think too easily persuaded, but nonetheless, recoverable people who aren't, intent on doing harm.
Yeah.
And so it's actually lovely to hear that from you, that you recognize in yourself that you would have been on the other side, and that and that your growth has put you somewhere where you now see that would have been an error. That's great.
Yeah. And encountering Jordan in that way, because when I went to NYU, the concentration of my journalism degree was in criticism. So I was already on this journey of going there and thinking, I'm going to be a cultural critic. Yeah. But I was being interrogated by my own way of thinking all the time and being challenged and realizing I needed to get a new vetting system on how I looked at stuff. But with Jordan was such a stark it was this evidence of you have to wait to make logical sense of something for yourself before you make a conclusion. You cannot just go based on the majority, because it was such an example of the majority of people, in a sense you would say, think this of him, and it's objectively not true. Like it, and it wasn't a conclusion that I said one video they're wrong. No, it actually, I would say about a week I was looking at stuff and I'm like, yeah, I've seen enough. This isn't real. Like, but I understood, like you said, the mob. If your friends say that's the enemy, this person's bad, you trust your friends. You trust the people that are on your side, that's aligned with you. And you don't ask questions. You pick up your weapon and they're the enemy. And that is how it goes for the majority of the time, I feel. Because there's times for me. So I don't know. I'm sorry if I'm going off other
You're
places,
fine.
but I'll say I made a conclusion about this person, and now we've had Zoom calls and we're, I would say, friends. I hope he would call me his friend. But my piece, Free Black Thought, the reason why I did that was, one, that experience with Jordan Peterson and other things and going through my program made me realize that people have to really, the art of critical thinking is very important, and not to make assumptions of people before hearing out what's actually the evidence. So Coleman Hughes, when he gave his speech at the congressional hearing against Ta-Nehisi Coates, this is when Ta-Nehisi was my professor. And I remember being at NYU, and I tuned in and I was rooting for my professor. And as I was rooting for him, I saw Coleman. I'm like, oh, he's anti-Black, he's confused, he's a coon, whatever. But then now, a year ago, when I went through all of this stuff and really taking myself to task on why I've come up with conclusions that are kind of faulty, actually, that don't really make sense, that I'm like, am I an echo of something, or is this my idea? I went back and I watched that congressional hearing, and I still thought Coates was right in certain respects. But then I listened to Coleman, I'm like, and for me, he's also right. They have different point of views of this thing, and yeah, it's controversial, but it's truthful. It stings a little, but what he's saying, I don't know if it's all the way wrong. And I still agree with Coates, and I was just like, wow. And I remember writing to Coleman, giving him that, not knowing what he'd think, because in the piece it says I call him a coon, so I'm like, oh, I don't know how this is going to go over. And he was just like, wow, this is amazing. And he retweeted it, and then everyone saw it. And then him and I have had conversations. And I think also that's what it comes to. It comes to when people realizing they're wrong and are willing to admit that and make amends with it. Hopefully people that down the line who mobbed you, to say the least, at Evergreen, hopefully they reassess that moment and maybe realize that they were wrong and find a way to make it right. But people just don't want to be wrong.
Yeah.
People just want to believe what they're doing is right, because at the end of the day, people want to be good. And I think everyone's confused on how to be good. So they go down, well, anti-racism alley. I'm going to be the best anti-racist. I'm going to call out everyone, or I'm going to go down this way or this way or this way. People are trying to find a way to be good. And not to say someone has the solution, but obviously right now we're all confused.
Yes.
And trying to make sense of it.
That's true. I say the most any of us are is half awake. So every so often somebody contacts me and they tell me that they were on the wrong side of the Evergreen situation, and I get apologies from them, and I always tell them I don't need an apology as long as you are willing to be honest with yourself and others that you were on the wrong side, and that's good enough. That's what I need from people. And so anyway, I hope maybe some will hear this and think about that possibility based on your courage. I mean, you obviously weren't there, but your courage in modeling your, you know, you don't even have to say what side you would be on, and yet you're courageous enough to say that you would have called it incorrectly. But I also, maybe the last thing we should talk about, since we've been at this for quite some time, is, you know, you mentioned Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Coleman Hughes and Jordan Peterson. And I must say, these are all people that I get something really important from. I'm a huge fan of Coleman's. There are a couple places in which he and I differ, but overwhelmingly, I think he's got it right. There are substantial places where I differ with Ta-Nehisi Coates, but I will say our family together read Between the World and Me, and we got a lot out of it. And I think it's very valid. I don't see him in the same light as I see Ibram Kendi, you know, or Robin DiAngelo, or other leaders of this movement who I see as either so painfully confused that they are beyond help, or cynical, you know. But no, Coates is a very different phenomenon. And, you know, Peterson is, so anyway, I guess the point is, interesting that you and I, coming from very different perspectives, land on all of these individuals as simultaneously tapped into the truth at an important level and not saying the same thing as each other, right? So that tells me something. This is a worthy list, and I would love to see more interactions that allowed their differences to be sorted out.
Yeah, and with that, I think people think because if one likes, you know, let's just say Thomas Sowell, they can't like Ta-Nehisi Coates, or Walt Whitman, you can't like James Baldwin. For me, I don't take anyone as a Bible. I don't believe in someone wholeheartedly. Oftentimes I find that I look at thinkers and writers and philosophers not like the solution to, it's almost like arithmetic, like not a solution to it, but like a factor to get to a solution. Because there's so many essays that I've written where I will bring in, you know, I'll bring in Thomas Sowell, but Thomas Sowell said something that might not be completely, let's just say, finished. But James Baldwin actually said something that helps connect and flush this out. But then Coleman said this, and then, you know, Toni Morrison said that, and Jordan Peterson actually said something about, you know, cleaning up your room, and this actually helped. Like, I see it all as like spices on a rack in the kitchen, and not every spice is for every dish, but sometimes you need to mix it up. And so that's how I see thinkers. And I don't think because they're on a side or this side, I think the whole side thing is arbitrary and the binary needs to be squashed. So I don't even think of it like that. I just read something, and if I get something out of this person and I realize they have a lot to give, then they go on my shelf. And I pull them off if I need to pull them off, and they might be completely polarizing in ideas. But the thing is sometimes they're looking at the same thing from different angles, and then I'm adding my angle, and that's actually filling out and fleshing out the issue more than seeing it through one lens.
Yep. You know, I got this from your tablet piece about the debate between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. I must tell you, I was completely unaware at a historical level about the two positions and the conflict between them. And frankly, it's funny, we're almost having the very same discussion to this day about, you know, it's sort of a personal responsibility versus, you know, active correctives. And you know, it ain't one or the other. There's a nuanced conversation to be had about what the right admixture is.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not having that conversation because of, as you point out, the polarization. So anyway,
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest that people who are interested check out your article in Tablet Magazine, which is available online.